Hi, and welcome to Stimming and Stilettos with Dr. Tasha. And you guys, as normal, I'm gonna gush about my guest because that's what I do. I'm so stoked to have this woman on the show with us today. And man, when I tell you she's awesome, she's amazing, she's done a lot of things. She's gonna tell you about herself. Um, but then y'all, we have a topic. We've discussed it amongst ourselves, and I think we've probably talked about it more than we probably should have since we were going to do a recording. But I'm stoked for this conversation. It is something that we should be talking about. It is a very important topic, and it just needs to be out here. It needs to be out here so that, and I'm really hoping, with all good intentions, that somebody picks this up and it keeps going, that the conversation keeps going, and that people are really adamant about doing something, right? Because it's not just a conversation just to have a conversation. It's what happens after, right? So, okay. So who's my guest? Who is my guest today? And so she is Sans Thakur. And let me just say, just thank you for just being a guest. So saying yes to the opportunity to be on Stimming and Stilettos. I cannot tell you how thankful and grateful I am that you said yes.
Well, I am grateful to be here, and especially with such a dynamic woman. Thank you for giving me the voice on your show, and of course, on such an important topic. So yes, my name is Sanskriti Thakur. Most people call me Sans. I am the Chief Growth Officer of Medable Inc., which is a clinical trials company bringing access to medicine and research to patients all over the world. I've spent the last 20 or so years in life sciences, half of that working inside of companies like pharma companies, biotech companies, medical device companies, and the other half advising them. And so it was really in the time of COVID, the beginning of COVID, that this massive unmet need was brought to my attention that, it's not enough to work for a big company. We have to join innovators, and Medable was an innovator at bringing patients closer to the making of medicine. So I've joined the company now for 2 years, and we've grown tremendously across the world and are serving patients in over 60 countries. It's really important to me that we're really bringing the best of medicine and science to everybody across the world equitably. And unfortunately, that's certainly not the case, as we'll see the impact of also in the topic of our discussion.
Right. Well, let me just say what you do and what the topic, the topic that we're going to discuss, both important. I can tell you that I think there is a need for people to sort of understand their, medical care, medicine, all of the things. So it's one thing for us to know what penicillin can cure, but like, what is it actually doing in the body? I'm just using that. So thank you for doing the good work, and for partnering with the company that is attempting to do the good work. We need it. We really do. We really do need it. So yeah, you're just she just keeps blowing my mind. And we've had you, like I said, we've talked before, people. Okay. So here's what I just want to ask you this question, because it's been brought to my attention. I don't think I knew or understood what the effect was. But I wanted to ask you, well, first, I don't know if you know this, but, and I don't mean to surprise you, but if we're talking about COVID, if we're talking about all of because there was a lot of things we can talk about in terms of COVID, what happened being at home, children and education, what has happened to families, and so on and so forth. But when we talk about the workforce, if you had to give an opinion, and we were going to divide this into a gendered and nuanced conversation, sort of, who would you think would have been the most affected by COVID in general?
Well, the reality is that undoubtedly, based on the data that we have, and there's quite a bit, because, keep in mind that, generally speaking, in this world, even though women are half of it and children are often cared for by women, the most of the data we have is actually not on women. So our data and our perspective on healthcare is still globally relatively skewed to whom we actually get it from. And in many cases, that's largely the male population. That said, COVID's silver lining was that there was so much attention put on healthcare for the first time, really,
Right.
that we actually have data, good data, to demonstrate where we really missed an opportunity to provide care. And so in this, and clearly, very passionate about this topic, just because it's something to learn from,
Right.
how we respond in a pandemic environment and the impact that it has is decades long. We all feel life has gone back to normal, and in many cases it has, but the impacts of what we saw happen to women, happen to children, in particular, are really distinctly unrecognized. And that's why we want to talk about those facts. But also, they are going to have very significant long-term impacts. The irony of it is something we should address. So, for example, women are thought across the world as traditional carers, despite many of us who work full time and on average have lower qualification, lower paying jobs. But would you be surprised to know that most of the majority of frontline workers were predominantly women?
I wouldn't be surprised by that information, only because my mom works in the healthcare industry. She's the first, frontline worker, and she's, at the time of COVID, she was 74, 75 years old, and she was still going into the building. So we were terrified. Terrified that she was going into the hospital every day, meeting with patients, and she was in that danger zone, for getting it. And they didn't have all of the data, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, about what the effects were, how we could treat it. There was no, there was no, I won't even say cure, the what are we calling that? The shot, so there wasn't any of that. And so my mom was very adamant about, I'm going in because that's what she does. She helps people. And that was her mindset. I'm going to help other people who don't, who are here and they're all alone, and they're going to pass away by themselves. She was not trying to hear us that we did not want to be, one of the people who had that experience. So I feel that in such a personal place that, and it wouldn't surprise me to know that. I'm thinking, we're talking about more than nurses and doctors. We're talking about all of the medical professionals and all of the ways.
Workers, all medical professionals.
Yes.
Every role inside of a hospital or a system that was in front of the pandemic, where people were needed to keep it going. And, I think that, the irony of it is that the front line were mostly women, but the long-term impact actually comes as well from the long-standing kind of challenges that women have in an economics perspective, in terms of the lack of jobs, the lack of equal pay, the lack of representation. That, with the irony that they were the dominant force in the front line, amplified by the fact that they also carried a higher, on average, viral load during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Both of those two things in the long run have a really long-standing challenge in that the gender gap globally reported by the World Economic Forum in 2021 estimates that there's almost a step back of 39 years for these women.
Whoa.
Due to the pandemic. So compounding factors. So first, it's hard enough to make it past the glass ceiling, right?
Right.
Then we've got all the women, many of them partnering, of course, with our good men, but predominantly women in the front line. Then
Wow.
all of our funding moved to vaccines and out of family planning, out of women's health. Not that there was much in there to begin. All of those compounded with the incredible challenges that I can go into with regards to women leaving the workforce. In totality, a step back of 39 years.
Wow. I'm
Pandemic.
I'm shocked. I mean, I'm almost 40 years. Wow. That's amazing to me. I guess I shouldn't be shocked, but maybe I don't know. I don't even know what to make of that number. I don't know.
This is globally.
And globally. Wow. And we were already like, what is the stats if we're talking about, men to women pay? So, for every dollar a man makes, it's still like what, 71 cents?
Yeah.
That a woman makes. And then if we put on all of the, I mean, I've just known my mom has a certain title at her job, right? But she did more than that. So I keep thinking about, okay, so I'm only making 75 cents where he's making and we may have the same job, but I'm doing more than that. And now we're saying that as a result of all of the things that came along with COVID, now we've been set back 39 years. I'm trying to think of what was happening 39 years.
And when we think about the positions women held, the influence, the total dollar value of their economics that they brought to the global markets, because so many have left their jobs, gone home. I mean, across 115, low and middle income countries. And here we get the least data on women, but 12 million at least have been documented to be unable to access family planning where they used to before, because the funding that used to go to the family planning went to this crisis care. Now, of course, crisis care was important, but the unintended side effect impacted family planning, impacted primary care services. And those services were disrupted for over 3.6 to about 4 months in total. And now imagine like the totality of that, women across the world not getting family planning. I believe as a result of just that moment, almost 1.4 to 1.6 unintended pregnancies occurred before women were able to go back to the family planning services that were disrupted, challenging their personal lives, their ability to get an education, their ability to work in that time because of the lack of protection. There are, there's an increase of maternal deaths that went from 8% to 39% due to reduction in the care associated with women and the care associated with managing domestic violence.
Yeah.
And the funding that went towards domestic violence shifted. All of these factors that surround how we care for women, how we promote them, how we educate them, how we bring them into the economy were fully disrupted during the time of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm still shocked. I'm still in a state of shock. And it's like, I can't even say that. I knew from conversations I've had with other people and doing my own research that there was an uptick in domestic violence cases. I am absolutely sure that I did not make the connection that there was a disruption to women's health care in the sense of family planning. But I mean, I think about it, I'm like, nobody was going anywhere for a solid good 3-4 months, maybe into 5 months. Like, so if you were on monthly birth control, well, you aren't going to get that, right? And so then it's like, so what happens at home? So it changes the whole dynamic of what was your relationship, and so unintended pregnancy, I can't even, I have 2 kids and I just can't even imagine not having planned those, right? And so, and
And
then
not
what
having
that does.
to have what is in front of you in your normal life in front
Right,
of you.
right.
This moment really took us back decades.
I
Yes.
see it. I see it when we're breaking it down, or when you're breaking it down like this. I see it. I see it. When we didn't have women, didn't have the agency or the voice to be able to make choices as it related to our body, our whole selves, in a sense. I see that. I see that. Wow.
And it's these unintended consequences, right? Because the goal of putting all of our energies into fighting a pandemic, no one thought about, well, what's going to get ignored? And
Right.
it's natural, it's seemingly ironic that, of course, why was it the women's services that were first to get ignored? It falls back to the hierarchy of importance, the hierarchy of investment.
Yeah.
And eventually, this impacts our children. And
Yeah.
so when we think about, the children themselves, like those same health related outcomes that the women faced, the family faced, the children faced, all of the management of children's health care, primary care, other vaccines that just keep children and moms healthy in their earliest years, compounded with elder children's withdrawal from schools, mental health, lack of access to outdoor time. These are contributors to long-term challenges in mental health, chronic disease, lack of good nutrition, lack of food
Right.
security, lack of access to what typically would be a healthful environment on average for these children. At least 2/3 of the households with children have lost income since COVID-19. 2/3
Wow.
have lost income. And, joint reporting, I think published by the UN's children's agencies and the World Bank, demonstrate that a number of these children are now living in multi-dimensional poverty, right? 1 billion in 2020, it was estimated, and an additional 100 million were added to that because of COVID.
Wow.
100 million children. And so when we think about how this compounds, first you set women back by 39 years.
Right.
And children, guess what? Half of them are girls.
Yeah.
And we're setting them back too. And this is the compounding impact, the compounding factors that it's very hard for, I think, often in general society for us to talk about these things, especially since it's so rare that the data even exists, and all of us just want to go back to normal.
Right.
We just want to feel that, things are back, that we're safe. I mean, we have an entire generation of students, almost 1.6 billion children, that did not go to school for a couple of years.
Yeah. And I mean, I just read an article the other day where they were talking about, so fun fact about me is I taught math for 3 years.
Wow.
And so I try to keep up with what's happening in the world of education. And they're saying that the kids that were in second and third grade, which are 2 pivotal grades, especially as it relates to reading and math, that those kids are, it's going to take all of their educate, like the, through to the 12th grade on to a sophomore in college before they're able to, if they are able to catch up. in terms of knowledge base, in terms of like reading and math fundamentals. So we have a whole generation of kids who are going to essentially be deficient in.
Absolutely. About 463 million of those children did not have access to remote education.
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
a lot of kids in America did,
Mhm.
but most millions and millions did not have that access. And similar to what you're saying, even in the United States and lower income categories, that access did not exist in a lot of years. And actually, this again compounding back to women. When we look at the lower income countries, this lack of education meant reverse gains
Yeah.
of the last 20 years of progress made in girls' educations in third world countries, where we took girls and we educated them, we sent them right back. And this is also now we're seeing increased poverty, and going backwards in time towards the inequality that, will these girls have access to that education in the next 10 years that they had access to in 2019? Probably not.
Wow. So I just want to sit with that. So can you say that? Because that's a big one too. Can you say that again so people really understand? Like we're running time, but we're running time backwards as it relates to women's health, women's well-being, women in general, women, girls, and children have been adversely affected by the pandemic in ways in which that I'll be honest with you and say to you and to the audience, I haven't heard talked about before. Like I haven't heard people having a discussion such as the one that we are having in any real way. And it needs to
that
be.
is incredibly naive of our society to ignore such a critical reality. And I will say it again, the pandemic reversed the move forward for women across the world by 39 years on average, based on a ton of factors that we just spoke about. But it almost more sadly, it reversed the gains of 20 years of global progress made in girls' education.
Yeah.
And that's the future. And this is going to mean more poverty, more inequality, lack of care for our babies. And we spent decades building this infrastructure to change. And I think we see that sometimes in the political environment. We see that in the tone and the nature of what's happening across the world. But it stems from the unintended consequences. No one intended that this would happen. But in principle, we have to ask, why did it happen only to women? And why aren't we talking about it? Because if we're the only ones talking about this, and these facts, by the way, are documented, I can send you all my sources and all my friends who know about it better than I do. But the reality is that this is a discussion that our girls need to hear, our children should understand, that the world that we are living in now is seemingly trying to recover, but half of the population is going to be left behind on average. I mean, if I tell you 13 million more child marriages are projected to take place in 2030 because of school closures alone in lower income countries. That means those school girls that were usually going to school, because they're not going to school, their parents not knowing or not having the education or not having the really just cultural and societal pressures, are marrying off their girls. Child marriage.
Yeah.
More than 13 million more.
13 million. I can't even take in that. Can't even take in that number. So I guess what I want to pivot to, and maybe not pivot is the wrong word, but I really want to kind of sort of talk about one, what do you think, or why do you think women were so adversely affected by the pandemic? What, if you had to use all of your experience and knowledge and, the research, what do you think are some of the reasons why we were affected in the ways in which we were? I have my theories, but I want to hear yours first.
Yeah. I think that when we look at the world of women, like we can really simplify it, like layered cake simplification is the best we can do in this dialogue, right? You know, you have women with agency. Like let's use me for an example, right? I was an executive woman. I had a job, but I was 8 months pregnant while I was doing all this work in COVID, right? Now my husband is an executive as well. But I still spent more of my time, whether it was after work, at night, getting up early, taking care of my kids during COVID than he did. I love him dearly, but that is a reality of my life.
Correct.
I spent more time, my personal energy, my personal focus. And I'm an executive and arguably the world's most free country, right? Now, if you look at the rest of the world, 1 in 4 women who were in the workforce, who were stable, who were excelling in the workforce, 1 out of 4 left or downshifted their careers versus 1 out of 5. And that because they believed they had to take care of something or do something or manage someone as a priority in the family.
Yeah.
When you look, you look at that layered cake and you see kind of the women of agency, the women in the workforce, and let's say women who are at home. In that paradigm, that's not an accurate one. I'm just making it up right now for the sake of this conversation. The disparity of the need that women, or the cultural requirement or the societal need, or whatever it is, women were the one to step down.
Yeah.
Women were also the ones on the front line to take the hit. Women were also the ones where the investment never went back to when it comes to healthcare, when it came to services. And women are in the center of the communities where community services were paused, disrupted. And so in every case, at every tier of our society, what is core to women: health, education, and work were disrupted significantly, putting us back years and years. It will take us another 10 years to get as many women executives as we used to have. It will take us 10 years or more to get those girls where the schools are now shut, to open those schools, to get them back. We will lose an entire generation of children who are now being married as children instead of going to school. We will lose an entire generation of women who would have otherwise gone to college that are now, unfortunately or fortunately, but nevertheless, pregnant and staying home.
Right. I think the way I'm looking at this, it's cultural, yes. It's societal, yes. And if I'm thinking about it in terms of taking a global view, I think there's, I really do believe that women still, I mean, we're not equal, right? We've never been thought of as equal. And so I could see conversations where it was like, well, she was going to that school, but the school's closed, right? And I never agreed with it to begin with. So now we're just going to do what we were going to do anyway, and marry her off, or whatever else that looks like in whatever country we're talking about. I can see things like that happening. I can see even here in the United States or other countries who have similar philosophies about the role of women. It still is persistent that there are traditional roles in which a woman is supposed to fulfill. And even for the most enlightened male and female in relationships, it still all comes down to you're the mom or you're the woman, and there are expectations and things that you are that are placed upon you.
I mean, I actually think all of it can be boiled down to economic value. So even as being a woman, 3/4 of unpaid work comprise 2/3 of all paid work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women do 3/4 of all unpaid work, but no one gives them a dollar value on that. But the dollar value that is trillions of dollars to the global economy.
Mm.
So it's how we value women, right?
Yeah.
If we valued primary care services and women's health first, then we would have ensured that as a global community, when we pivoted to managing a pandemic, that we continued those services. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Drugs were still available for erectile dysfunction, for God's sake. And women sitting anywhere in the world, if their role as a mother was valued, right, then and the equally like in a contributing factor, then they would also, and their role as a learner was valued, then they would be also sent to school. So yes, absolutely, those values come from, as you said, cultural and societal upbringings and beliefs. But simply and foundationally, like when I go to my job, I get a paycheck. Why doesn't my friend who's a mom,
Get a paycheck.
get a paycheck,
Yeah.
or at least valued as such, so that there's an understanding of the value that all women and all people and communities and families have, at least to protect the children that are the outcome of those relationships. I think the worst situation, though, and what's going to take us a lot longer to manage our sisters is, they estimated 47 million women and girls were pushed into extreme poverty. And those types of numbers, when we talk about extreme poverty, we're going back to kind of, we have to be very concerned about really challenging discussions like sex trafficking.
I was just getting ready to say that's exactly where my mind went.
And how, as a global community, are we not going to forget that even though a pandemic is over, the unintended consequences are just as important to manage.
And we don't have any, well, I guess we do have a choice. We can choose to continue to ignore it. But in the long run, if we don't address this issue, these issues that we talked about, women, children, working moms, and as it relates to our kids and girls in particular, we're going to reap these consequences, these unintended consequences from the pandemic that have not been addressed. If we don't take measure, we don't take stock first, if we don't put stop gaps, and we don't put programming, if we don't give funding, if we don't value or put money behind family planning and all of the things as it relates to women's health, we're going to reap these consequences, and it's not going to be good for any of us in the long run. Because it's like we can't talk about women's health and not talk about how that has long, far-reaching implications for society as a whole.
Exactly. I mean, we're right now in our dialogue, we're talking about some statistics related to women, but ultimately that downstream impacts the shape of our society. It impacts the way we raise our children. It impacts, the ultimate progress of humanity, which is about us managing this beautiful world we're in and generating the best outcomes for our people, whether they're man or woman,
right,
doesn't matter. But putting women on the sideline and not recognizing the impacts and the downgrade that as a sex, as a community has essentially unfolded is negative for the entire human species. And I think especially so for children. And I don't think I have to tell you that, of course, the socioeconomic class is a really big part of this, but Black women, Hispanic women, most impacted across the world, in the United States specifically, but across the world, it's always the lowest income where we hurt our women and girls the most.
Yeah, I mean I can't help but think about, again, think about my mother, but I also think about my aunties. I think about my sisters. I think about my girlfriends who have been greatly impacted by by the pandemic, where we've had conversations where I had a girlfriend of mine during the pandemic. She had a great offer. She had a great offer at a job, fully remote job, right? She was able to stay home with her kid. But then he had some health problems that they discovered during the pandemic, and she couldn't navigate it. So
Yeah.
so what happened? It wasn't her husband that was, okay, well, I'll just quit my job and I'll be home. That was not even a discussion. And when I brought it up to her, she looked at me like I was, like, what are you saying? And I'm like, well, both of you have jobs, right? So, what in this discussion, I think the world according to me should have been, what is the impact of one versus the other, right? If he quits his job, the husband quits his job and takes over running, the son's health, versus you quitting your job and taking over the child's health issues, right? So what are, like, let's run this all the way down, right? And see what would be the best for the family. And I can tell you that never happened. That conversation never happened. It never
Yeah,
happened.
women don't, I mean, we know this to be true, that they don't fight often for themselves, and even their plea isn't as compelling to the world.
Mm,
That from a woman, the plea isn't as compelling to the world on average. It's hard for me to say this, but the reality is so real. When, I have the privilege, but also the challenge of seeing unabashedly clearly, this data is very real. And from the top to bottom, women fight, women protect, women defend. They have in every war that we've ever had in this world.
but we
And
don't fight for ourselves, though.
not always. But also the world as it's set up is not set up to protect women and children. So at the top line, you have the women, right? That were, again, unintended consequences. Everyone will tell you, gosh, we didn't want those
Right.
family planning services to go down. We didn't want primary care to be disrupted, right? But unintended consequences in this case hit hardest women and children. And then double, triple, multiply that by 10x for lower income countries.
Yeah.
And double, triple, multiply that by many more for the working mom or the mother working in the informal economy, not being tracked by a paycheck, W-2, and their children. And that is a decade, multiple decades of a consideration that our leaders, our people, every person in a community needs to start thinking about. So that next time when you have a girl who's like, I don't want to go to school because maybe, it's too far away, we take the extra effort to figure out what is the opportunity for us to support a different outcome there.
Okay, so question. What do we, I just want to say, what do we do now?
I mean, the first step is always awareness, right? We are really, really, it's only been a couple of years, right? And so much data, what I'm sharing with you is still fairly fresh data. More of it will be built, delivered, understood. But just that we as educated women don't have this dialogue, that's the number one problem. So I think awareness, knowledge that this is very real, that it is around the world, that it is a pandemic of its own. is something we have to be very clear about, right? This is not like, I know you and I were kind of having a discussion, but this, I would say this is not coffee talk. This is real talk. This is stuff that everyone should know.
Right.
I think once we have that, we have incredible means as a community, as a global, like global teams, global citizens of humanity, to do something about it. But very little can be done if it's not an acknowledged problem.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with that. We have to, you have to bring awareness. There has to be it's almost like you have to admit that there's a problem, right? You have to see that there's a problem before you can deal with the problem. And so, everybody, the majority of folks have to agree that it is indeed a problem. So that
some people might be happy. Some
right.
people can say that's the way it should have been. I didn't want it to change. Going back 20, 30 years, exactly what I wanted.
Well, right. But then that too is that's another issue and another problem, because I mean, there was a reason why progress was made, and that can't be the thought of that. The reality of said progress is still available. You know what I mean? It's so when we say we're talking about sort of getting back what we've lost, but we also have the opportunity to sort of push past that. Like, what's new, what's different, how can we innovate this? So not only is it about, hey, getting girls to go to school, but how do we educate them so that they can become educators, and so that they can be the next innovators, so that they can be you know what I mean? So like,
we can do it better this time, right?
We can do it better because we learned some things when we did it before. And so that's sort of the joy of it, in the sense, but it's also a lot of hard work, and there has to be an acknowledgement of where we are, where we've been, where we are, and where we have the potential to go. And there has to be a drive to that, in my view.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about women, but I think it's well understood in the world that, this becomes a family problem. This is a community challenge. Where you have educated women, where you have freedom of healthcare, freedom of education, you have much stronger economies, much more innovative economies, much healthier environments, right? And that's better for the world. So as long as people see this as an opportunity to elevate, to redeem an unintended challenge, right? And they don't see it as, oh gosh, not another women's discussion. I think that, we have to be very thoughtful about also the narrative around this, because statistics are critical, right? But the impact of that is on everyone.
Yeah.
I have a boy, right? I mean, for sure, he sees his world with me in it, and the role I play. And, if his world is entirely dependent upon, my health, my well-being, and those are boys of the future that we are also putting in really challenging circumstances. With the freedom that women have also comes the freedom that men have, perhaps not to work, perhaps to take on a lifestyle or a role that the world, the culture that they live in didn't intend for them, right? So with this kind of move back in time, there's absolutely men who are equally impacted by this. And I don't want us to forget that, right? Yeah. I do think that the data and the focus has to be on women, because we do have to go save those who are in fact dying because of this.
Right.
But it is everyone's problem.
Love. I think that we'll leave it there. I think that we will leave that there. I will say first, I really want to thank you for your time today. I immensely enjoyed this conversation. I also feel like there's a part 2 in here. And so I am going to book some other, some additional time on your calendar, so we can talk about, because I feel like there are a couple of different things that I think we can talk about, especially for me as it relates to being a minority woman, that we touched on here, but I think we can go deeper, that I would love to talk with you about if you are amenable to doing so.
Listen, I think anything that we can do to ensure that the rest of the world is having this conversation, right? That isn't, if we can be meaningful
Yeah,
to people in their lives and how they see the future of their families and the future of their path, we should absolutely do that.
awesome. So y'all heard it here. Y'all gonna hear Sands on here again at some point, having this and needed conversation. Listen, if you guys have not listened to a single episode of Stemming and Stilettos before now, you guys need to listen to this one. And then send it to your girlfriend, send it to your husband, send it to your guy friends, send it to your workplace, send it to whoever, your healthcare providers, whoever. Let's get this issue out into the public. It's gotta be, we almost have to be out loud about this. And I hope people understand what I mean when I say out loud. Like, I need this to be, we're rolling down the street and we're hearing San's voice on the radio as she's talking about this, as she's giving us these stats, as we're having this discussion. And I hope everybody goes and does their own research and discovers the truth of it all. And then we have to decide to do something, because it would be sad if this is just a discussion that was had between two people, between two women who greatly understand the issue and are willing to put in the work. But we are two among many. And so it is upon all of us to do this work together to get to the place to make the change that we want to see. And so that's my imploration for everyone today, is that you take this, you listen, you learn, you do your own research, and then let's get to work. Let's get to work. All right, let's get to work. So Sands, I really want to thank you again for just being so gracious and so kind, and Jen, so knowledgeable about this subject, and then being willing to talk about it. Thanks.
It is not just my pleasure, but I think it's something we owe to all people, is this knowledge. And I just want to be with you and empowering whoever's listening to go learn more about it themselves and take some action, because it's definitely going to shape the future of our children and their children as well.
All right, you guys. So that concludes this episode of Stemming and Stilettos. Again, you have my declaration. You have your homework for today. And don't forget it. Outside of going back and listening to past episodes of Stemming and Stilettos, when this one comes on, your job is to give it to your girlfriend and your boyfriend and your friend and your boss and whoever else, so that we can all get together, have these discussions, do our research, and then put programming in place, can implore our government officials, we can help in other countries, we can do the work, y'all. We can do this. We can put all of our hands in to help us at least recover, if not surpass where we were. Okay. All right, you guys. So as I do with every single show, I take my leave of you. But again, like, subscribe, and listen on YouTube as well. And until we meet again, you guys, keep yourselves safe.